All right, folks, let's come back together here if we could. And we're now down to the testimony and questions by those opposing the application. So if you're here to or have either questions or testimony opposing the application, I'd ask you to stand, and we'll get everybody sworn in at one time, and then you can come up one at a time, and I'll get your name and address at that point. So is anybody here that either has questions or would like to testify? Yes, sir. Okay. I see two. Anyone else? All righty. Ms. Fox, if you'll swear them in.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
All righty. And whoever would like to go first.
Good morning. My name is Ed Carden. I live at 4702 Chelsea Meadow Way, LaGrange, Kentucky.
Okay.
I have one question to start off with. On this property map here to the right, the distance that green space between.
You can draw on the screen with your finger if you want to kind of.
Right here.
Okay.
The distance between the back of the lot of that neighborhood and the
Mr. Young, get you. Yeah. Sorry.
I want to make sure I get it correct, so I'm going to measure that. It's not labeled on the record plat. I want to make sure I scale it correctly.
Okay.
I'm here today. I live at 4702, which is where that little triangle I just drew is just up from there.
Okay.
I'll be able to see this subdivision from my kitchen window, basically. And I'm adjacent to the Heather Ridge subdivision. And I moved in there in 2006. And when I moved in there, of course, we went over this earlier, there was going to be 122 homes on 72 acres. Now we're going to 173 homes on the 72 acres, or a little less, because the Schuritz is a little larger now, what they're keeping. My concern is with the R2A zoning. I'm not against the subdivision itself. Mr. Doppler's a neighbor of mine. I know he's a businessman, and this is an opportunity, and I don't hold that against him for putting a subdivision in here. My concern is I grew up in a county just like Oldham County in north of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and it suffers terribly from poor planning. And when you go back there 50 years ago, they had the same two-lane farm roads and two-lane highways that connected rural farms or family-owned farms, a few grocery stores, some town centers like Peewee Valley, Crestwood, LaGrange. They're all connected by two-lane highways. You go back there today, nothing is the same except the two-lane farm roads. Okay? And they put in the Band-Aids, they put in the turning lanes, they put in the traffic lights, but it doesn't work. And I see from the engineers' comments already, we're below the standards of what we want for the roads in Oldham County. I get that the roads are here. We can't just run out without money and increase the size of these roads. But just on the stretch of road that I live on, in about a mile, we went from Grand Villa, 1+ acre lots in a subdivision. Stonefield Trace, 3/4 to 1 acre lots. Heather Green, we went to half-acre lots, and that was supposed to continue with Heather Ridge and the Commons. But now we went to 1/4 acre lots, and now approximately 5th acre lots for this subdivision. So the continued trend to reduce the size of the lots in the subdivisions is a concern to me as an Oldham County resident, and I believe it should be for everyone else. I don't want to see my commute time from Buckner to LaGrange go from 15 minutes to 45 minutes, and I don't think anybody wants to see their commute time from where they live to I-71 go from 5 minutes to 15, 20 minutes every day. So that's a concern to me. I do applaud Mr. Urban on the pushback on the Pulte homes in Prospect. I think that was also a concern with the road width of 22 feet. The 170 apartment complex that was kind of diverted in Brownsboro Road over there on 329. Another thing if the infrastructure's not ready for it, I'd like to see, telling the developers, no, but not yet. And I also applaud Judge Vogel for going to DC to talk about the I-71 corridor, because we know when that backs up, then everything backs up. The 146, 22, 53, 393, you can't get anywhere. So I do appreciate that, and I do also appreciate the fact that we've improved some of the roads. 22 has been straightened, 53 has been straightened, but they're still 2-lane roads. They haven't gone to 4-lane roads, like the 393 and the 329 bypasses. Those are the roads that are going to need to be put in the future to move this amount of traffic through this area. So I'm not against growth in Oldham County. I just think the growth needs to be sustainable, and it's a balance between infrastructure, which doesn't come from the developer's pocket. It comes from some of the public's pocket, and then the developers, having the infrastructure to put it in. And I know it's a balance. I just want to voice my opinion on the continued trend to decrease lot size in the county. And I hope that, like I said, not against growth. Don't say no, but maybe not yet. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Can you answer the question?
Sure.
Just for answers questions. Scale's 30 foot on the Stonefield Trace side, and then ours is 10 foot from pillar to pillar.
It's 30 on the Stonefield Trace, 10 to
10
the,
on the
to the property line to the back of your lot.
Yes.
All right, next on the, like to speak?
Hello, my name is Dan Feigert. I live at 2528 Cedar Point Road, kind of catty corner and just neighbors to this property. I did attend the first public meeting that they presented, and it was well done. I think the neighborhood that they've got planned is a nice neighborhood. I just don't think this is the right area for it. We've heard this morning, or at least I've heard this morning, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a public official of any kind like that, but we have heard that the road is probably a little undersized. And, 17 to 22 feet doesn't seem like that much, but when you drive down the road every day, it's fairly significant to us who live there. I've talked to my neighbors. I think the majority of the neighbors, if not all, feel pretty much the same way I do, so I guess I would like to, in a sense, speak on their behalf. So the road is a little inadequate. The size of the school is marginal. It's going to put it up a little over 100% of capacity. And again, echo some of the comments from the first speaker. And I was going to talk a little bit more about some of those things, but I guess instead, what I will say, to not reiterate the same things, is what this neighborhood does, I guess, to me, is begins to change the tenure of this landscape the way it is right now, and why most of the neighbors are opposed to it. Bigger lots, larger yards, and the infrastructure. It's a rural community. It's not it's not Norton Commons. And if we chose to live in Norton Commons, we would move there. We don't want a piece of Norton Commons to come next door to us. It increases the traffic, it increases a lot of things. And it pushes the infrastructure that's there to the very capacity. I think your position as a zoning board is to look where these types of subdivisions need to go. And I don't doubt that there are a place for them in Oldham County. This just doesn't seem like the place. If you were to drive out there and look around, it's not Norton Commons. And to take a piece of Norton Commons and stick it in the middle of this seems out of place. It pushes the infrastructure, and it begins to change the tenure, the feel of that area. From a rural landscape, the neighbors, my guess is most of the neighbors have gardens, for example. None of the people in this neighborhood have gardens. There's not room. It changes the tenure of the type of people that live there. It changes the tenure of the atmosphere that we chose to live in. Nothing wrong with it. It's a well-planned community. I like the open space. They do a good job with what they have. This just isn't the place for that type of a neighborhood to be, in my humble opinion. That's not why I moved there a few years ago, was to live next to this. So I guess you guys make those decisions. Is this the right place for this type of a neighborhood? Is this type of a neighborhood, in demand? I don't doubt that it is. But again, I don't think this is the place that neighbors around it would like to see it put. So I guess keep that in mind as you consider, you know, whether you can approve. And there's 2 or 3 variances here. This is kind of pushing the envelope of a lot of issues, I guess, for this board to consider. To me, the R2 pushes those issues already. The R2A or whatever it changes to pushes it even more. And, you know, I guess I would like you guys to consider that as you make the decision. Think about where this belongs, and is this the type of community where this belongs? And, you know, I would say no. But again, that's ultimately your decision. So thank you for your time, Commissioner Jeffries. It's nice to see you again. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, anyone else? I know there was only 2 that stood up to testify, but is there anyone else that has questions now or would like to testify? Okay, seeing no one else, we will move into the questioning of the applicant and those opposing the application by the commission. Commissioners, questions? Mr. Hampton, I think you said you might have a question?
Yes, I'd like to go back to the road question again that Mr. McWilliams brought up. There's part of that road down there that has been improved. There's I don't know if you want to call it curbs or not, but there is a section of that that is in much better shape than some of the other sections. Who made those improvements?
Well, the county did, and that's beyond, I'm not sure what cardinal direction that is. I guess either north or north, let's call it north of this development. And part of that was because there were drainage issues on that roadway years ago. And that was a county project because it's a county road.
But if you-
But it's not 22 feet either.
I didn't say it was 22 feet. I said there was improvements made and there was some kind of curbing or something there.
Right.
And to me, and I do live in that area, it makes a big difference whether it's just visually in your head or whatever, driving when it's that way and when it's not that way. And not to be, well, I guess I am being critical. The striping thing makes no sense to me at all. Is it even appropriate? I was told at one point that it wasn't even appropriate to stripe a county road that was less than 22 feet wide.
I'll let Mr. Harris answer that.
Mr. Harris.
Turn your mic on. I don't think the mic, is it on?
There we
Jim
go.
and I have had that discussion before about the appropriateness of striping a road. Our opinions vary slightly, but the commonality that dividing the center so when 2 cars meet, they know how far over they need to be, seems like a safety improvement to both of us.
You didn't answer my question.
That's right, I didn't. It was my opinion that if you can't meet a lane requirement, then you shouldn't stripe a road. It was also my opinion that you don't centerline stripe a road unless you also edge stripe a road.
You still haven't answered my question.
Please ask it again.
Is it appropriate or in code or legal or whatever to stripe an 18-foot road?
We have nothing in our code that says to stripe it or not to stripe it. It's not covered.
Okay.
It just,
Can I just, but in our
Please.
conversation, we talked about not striping a road where you have less than 9 feet of lane width. And this, Scott went out and he looked at it, and it's 18 feet, so there will be 9 feet of lane width.
so
The
why,
issue is that no segment of Cedar Point Road has the outer edge striped white, and that's what won't be happening here, I guess, is that they won't be able to stripe the edge of the pavement.
I understand that we're not going to 22 feet, but why can't we extend those curbs, the curbing, like the rest of the road is, all the way down?
Wasn't an option we discussed.
Well,
Well, we talked about actually, the first binding element was, in your staff report, it even says going to 22 feet. But the question is where?
But you said we don't have the money.
Well, no, this would be the developer's cost. The question is, where would we make that improvement? Just in front of his project? And if you went to 22 feet, you went 18 feet, 22 feet, back to 18 feet.
That's not what I'm talking about. Where the curbing is now, I'll call it curbing for lack of a better term, that's not 22 feet.
It's 18, correct.
So why can't we make it all like that?
So you just want to add curb
Yeah.
to the edge of the road?
I think it makes it a whole lot better. It's a whole lot better than just striping.
Other than filling in the ditches, which can create a hazard, and we technically don't have clear zone off the edge of the road, that would be a safety issue, but that would be an upgrade not to county standard because of the collector status of the road.
that all,
You
Mr.
run
Hampton?
into a lot of problems when you try to upgrade something not to the standard.
Well, you upgraded a big section of it, not to 22
Well,
feet.
I wasn't here for that, and I don't know how that came
Well,
about or
okay,
how it
nobody's
was
really,
allowed.
but
Do we even have the right-of-way for that?
I don't know.
We'd never studied that, no, to see what the right-of-way
Is that
width is.
something you
even.
can't even answer?
Right.
I can't, but I can tell you, having been out there and looked at it, the ditches are very close to the edge of the road and fairly deep, and there's a lot of utilities, hydrants, electrical poles. So I can't imagine a right-of-way not being needed.
Says, yeah, that, on their development plan, it says existing
Guys, look
Cedar
at this
Point
one.
Road 50-foot right-of-way.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Hampton, right now?
I just want to say again, just to be sure that we're talking about, is there right of way? Well, we don't know if there is or not. We're talking about, can it be done? We don't know what it's going to cost or not cost. You did a section of it and didn't seem to have all that problem with it. So I don't understand why you can't extend it.
Yeah, neither of us were here when that was done, so I can't tell you any of the particulars.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't have the answer because I wasn't prepared for the question.
Ms. Crosby?
If I ever get this on, Mr. Delper. I think in reading some of the papers last night, the cost of those homes are in the $300,000 range. Am I correct?
I mean, that's always a hard question to answer, but if I'm going to use a project that we're involved in now, just started in Crestwood, Claymont, of the
Yeah.
Villas of Claymont Springs. And our entry-level house there is at $339. And I envision using some of the similar plans from that development in this particular development. So what the cost of the house is going to be, 12 to 18 months from now when we're finally getting around to building houses, I don't know for sure. I can tell you that the same house that I was building in January of this year, if I started today, is anywhere from 8 to 12% higher just based upon labor and material cost. So I don't want to lock myself into what that, exact price is going to be, but I would think that somewhere in that mid threes is going to be our average price, yes. I expect, as Kevin pointed out too, I think we're gonna have a lot of walkout basement homes that I think will end up driving the demand for finished basement. So I think when you all of a sudden end up with, the home plus a finished basement, and just following normal patterns in developments, the further you get into development, the more expensive the home gets.
While I like this concept, and I don't want to get into testing,
Careful,
I know
that's
you're going
fine.
to get me for it. While I like the concept, the size of the houses, are they like 3 bedrooms, 4, or what?
A combination of
Combination of
3-bedroom to
size.
4-bedroom. Square footage wise, you're going to be anywhere from 1,400 or so on the low end to 2,600 on the high end probably. That's above grade square footage is what I'm referring to.
Okay.
Anything else?
All
Ms.
right,
Crosby?
that does it. Thank you.
McWilliams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, I'm going to have to ask you to come back up. Probably ought to sit close to the mic for the rest of this meeting.
Assuming you're the right person to ask, is there historical precedent that you're aware of where we have striped roads in the county that were more narrow than 22 feet?
No, but I should also point out, I've only been here 11 months.
I can give you an example.
There's not a lot of
though.
historical precedents for me at all.
Okay?
Zale Smith Road, when the Planning Commission approved Dogwood Estates, one of the binding elements was that they stripe all of Zale Smith Road from their project all the way to Kentucky 53. In that situation, if you go down there today, you can see that there's a right side tire track of the road and there's a left side tire track, and the one in the middle is where everybody's driver's tires match, regardless of your direction. So the striping will just kind of get people to slow down and stay on their side of the road, hopefully. There's just enough width, so it was done. And I can't remember what the width of that road was, but this commission had placed a binding element before. And that's kind of why we proposed this, because we do have, I won't call it a precedent, we've done it in the past,
Okay, at least once.
at least once.
And you're not sure of the width of Zale Smith?
I can't remember
Are
what
you
it
aware
was.
of any issues from the standpoint of congestion and/or safety that has been created due to the striping scenario?
Well, they haven't moved forward with the development, so they haven't striped it yet.
Okay. I have another question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Me?
You can sit down, just, it'll stay close.
Don't go so far.
Mrs. Zimmerman? Yes. Just a quick clarification statement. But I want to make sure that I heard what I thought I heard. When you were talking about the traffic study,
Yes.
if I heard you correctly, you had indicated that there was not a need for a left turn lane into the subdivision based on the traffic study?
Correct. A left turn lane at the entrance does not meet the warrant for installing a left turn lane.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And I was looking up the dogwood trees answer.
Anything else, Mr. McWilliams?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Mr. Finney?
Ms. Zimmerman, I have a question for you. I'm sorry, I just didn't get to the mic quick enough. There you go.
Go, girl.
Yes, sir.
I'm concerned on the intersection of Highway 146 and Cedar Point Road. A left-hand turn there now, there is a left-hand turn lane off of Cedar Point involved, but to make that turn, it's something I use frequently, is sometimes very, very difficult because of the traffic flow. What, you said right now that the traffic level there is a D?
No, currently that northbound left turn operates at level service A.
That's not going north. Maybe we're not talking about the same thing. I'm coming,
On 146 going towards?
No, ma'am.
No,
No, ma'am.
coming
No.
off. That's currently operating at level service C.
C?
C as in cat, yes. The additional traffic generated by this development would cause that to go to level service D as in David.
Okay.
I think the point there for you is that as bad as that may feel to you, that is level service C. So I mean, I think that this is an educational moment to think about that if you think that is bad, that is really level service C. So.
I don't do this during school hours. I can't imagine what it would be then. I mean, that's just my, but anyway, okay, if that's,
Okay.
yeah, that just seems like it's a extremely difficult turn to make. All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Point of clarification, I think for Mr. Young or someone up there, in this brochure, your open space is listed as 9 acres in 2 different places. You're always quoting, and also in the application is listed as 6.1. Is there, just a clarification, what's the difference?
We actually prepared that for the neighborhood meeting before, as we were still getting comments per TRC comments. One of the items we had to make sure the residual tract was at 5 acres. Originally, I think we had it at 4.7, so that's the difference. So as we finalized the plan, we had less open space.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Douglas.
Yes, I have several questions. First would be either for Mr. Young or Mr. Nichols. When you had your first neighborhood meeting and and even the second neighborhood meeting, was the results of those meetings presented to staff?
Yes, there is a summary of both neighborhood meetings presented to staff.
With the signatures of the neighbors?
Correct, yes.
So staff has those copies? Because I don't believe we were presented any of those. I didn't get them on my email. They weren't in the packet either. Wasn't in our emails. Did you get them?
So this is what they submitted.
Some of
And
us
I
didn't
didn't
get
add in your staff report the note, the August meeting, because that was not to our standard. Our standard is they're required to submit, they're required to have a neighborhood meeting with both first and second tier. The first one was we caught first tier, and so we asked them to have a new neighborhood meeting, and they did meet the requirement for that September 19th meeting.
And do you know if they, any concerns that the neighborhoods had that was answered by the applicant?
I feel like that's something you should ask the applicant, but I did read through that, and it looked like they
Addressed
had
them.
questions about lot size and how their property values were gonna be affected by the smaller lots and smaller homes, questions about open space and making sure there's a buffer on the perimeter. So whether or not they've answered those questions, I think is something that's up to the applicant to prove to you all.
Okay. And then my question will be to Mr. Young, I guess. Mr. Nichols might answer it, but we'll ask Mr. Young since he brought it up, and I believe he discussed it. In your proposal, or in the proposal, you mentioned that when it was talking about that back level behind between stone field trays, you kind of sold it like there's 40 feet there. But then you went and said, well, we are only providing 10 feet of open space, and Stonefield Trace has 30 feet. You don't own Stonefield Trace, right?
That is correct.
So you're only selling us, as proposal, there's 10-foot open space there, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. I want to clarify that, because
Yeah,
you
that-
almost sold it like, we've got 40 feet back there,
Yeah.
which you really don't. You only have 10 feet.
I thought I presented Stonefield Trace that we were adding to their open space.
Okay. My next question is, I believe you're the one that showed the pictures of the photographs between some examples of the 5-foot variance, or the 5-foot side yard setbacks.
Correct.
Was a study done, or have you looked at how the drainage situation would be in between those houses compared to those units? Because if you notice, you know, the air conditioning units are on the side. You got the electrical units on the side. Where were the utilities? And I'm sure there's utilities right away between there also, correct?
That is correct. And what we do, and Erickson and I do this together, what we do is we design the subdivision as Eric looks at the drainage system and determines where there needs to be a pipe. And this goes back to what Mr. Harris, one of his comments, is when we do add a pipe between homes, there's only 2 to 3 situations in a subdivision where you have a drainage pipe coming through the property. We expand those lots on either side because you'll have a 15-foot drainage easement instead of a 10-foot like most lots that we're requesting. So yeah, we make those lots wider so we can accommodate the pipe in the 15-foot. So I don't want to say we're not at record plat level where we're down to the foot on that, but we do put in some extra room on those lots. So that was one of my, or actually one of our comments back to Mr. Harris on the homeowners association is we will have 15-foot drainage easement on those pipes if that is of a concern. So we'll make sure we want to make sure we can get in there and repair that.
So
if
when the
never-
water runs off of those houses in that 5-foot side yards,
Correct, 10 foot between the two.
10
but
foot.
yeah, mhm.
where's it go?
It gets directed either going to the back to a drainage swell along the back property line, or if the lot is sloping to the front, it goes to the street.
And I noticed on the engineer map
Mhm.
or design, the arrows around the property lines, is that considered the drainage swells or?
Now, it's an overall drainage pattern of which direction the drainage is going. At that level, at 100 scale, I couldn't show you where each individual, but we're showing a general where the natural topography is taking the drainage.
So can you assure us that at 10 foot from Stonefield Trace, water will not infringe on their property?
What we have told Stone Filtration, this goes back, I'm not sure who asked the question about the neighborhood meeting, maybe it was yourself. One of the comments that Stonefield Trace had is, and I'm going to answer it in a little bit of a roundabout fashion, but there's existing trees and vegetation there that's just part of their 40-foot. Some of the folks in Stonefield Trace cut their grass back into the open space because people like that. Some leave it natural. What Billy has said to the homeowners association, and correct me if I say this wrong, is that we will work around the existing trees in our 10-foot and make sure we get our ditch on the back of our lot. So we don't want to go in there and clear that 10-foot. That kind of defeats the purpose of our open space buffer. So that is what we've promised, or Billy has told the homeowners association that we would do, and he's directed Eric and myself to do that. Yeah, that's the intent.
Has there been a drainage issue on any of that property from the existing subdivision that's being built above it?
Mr. Sherrick would have to answer that. It's not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It's still his property. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
That's all.
Mr. McWilliams, let me get, Bob Klingfuse had a question, and then I'll get back to your second question. Mr. Klingfuse.
Yes. Was the fire department okay with the 10 feet between houses?
Staff could correct me if I'm incorrect. They
Use
made
five-
they made no comment on that. They had a comment about the radius in one of the cul-de-sacs that we enlarged, but Brooke could answer that.
Freeman?
General fire code is 5 feet between structures. So you've got 10 feet between a house and the other house. So it's 5 feet on each side. So roundabout answer of saying yes, the fire department would be able to get through and do adequate fire suppression.
The fire department was okay?
They didn't comment on the variance.
Okay.
Their only comment was that hydrants should be installed during the technical review committee.
My other question would be, can the water company supply enough water for fire protection? I didn't see a letter on it.
I'll give you the general comment. If you want more specific, Eric Sen can add to this. Russ Rose, Billy paid to do a hydrologic analysis because that is required to prove that we have the water suppression system. And what we're required to do, get back to the site plan. There is going to be an 8-inch water main stubbed here. We're required and I don't know the lot number, but at certain percentage, say we can develop that percentage of lots that I just circled there, to go any further to meet the hydrologic analysis for adequate water supply, we have to make that connection to there. So we are tied to a certain number of homes before we have to make that connection, which ultimately, that goes over to Stonefield Trace. So once you loop this whole system, you have adequate. So yes, we can do phase 1, maybe we can start phase 2, depending on our phases, but at some point we have to make a connection into our adjacent subdivision, Heather Ridge. So yes.
Anything else, Mr. Klingfuse?
No.
Okay, Mr. McWilliams.
Me?
Pass it off if you want
I'll
to.
try.
You showed an overlay earlier where you all had looked at developing this under the 2A zoning.
Yes, correct, R2, the
R,
original
excuse
plan.
me, R2 zone. And help me with that. Under the R2 zoning where it developed, how many homes would be in there?
I'd have to go back and count that. It was done as an overall, I don't know it for this specific tract. I'm sorry, I don't know that. I'd
Well,
have to count.
you probably, as smart as you are, figured out my next question, which was gonna be, what's the difference between the number of homes in R2 versus R2A?
I'd have to count. It will be more, I have to count to give you an accurate number.
Billy, you know? You look like you're figuring it up.
Need to get you back up, Ellie, if you would.
Do you know that number?
This is theory, in theory, right? It can go up to 98.
I mean, in theory, at the 3.63 per acre, it'd be 98 lots at R2.
98 in R2 and how many again?
We're 102 on the request for R2A.
Okay, so 98 versus 102. 4. An increase of 4. Billy, hang around there. And your all's statement of justification, one of the things that you said was a denial of the variance would prevent development and would be counter to many of the established goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. Did you mean that?
Yes, I think we did. I mean, and I guess the intent of that is the 50-foot lot width. It's paramount to have the 5-foot sideline restriction to be able to get the building width for the footprint of the homes.
I guess may be a little slow, but there's a difference of 4 homes, and that variance would prevent development. I guess I was struggling with it.
It would prevent development of this plan.
This plan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I go back to one of Mr. Klingelfuss's question too? I want to point out one thing on the fire department question. I think it's important to note, because we're talking about the sideline, that the building code doesn't require anything special when it comes to building code requirements until you get 6 feet or less between houses. And so I think that's another thing, as I think Kevin or someone else pointed out earlier, not to use the Norton Commons reference. I think this is a totally different development than what Norton Commons is. At Norton Commons, you have a lot of zero lot line just because everybody knows that's what it is. And, while it there's an Oldham County section that's about to come, and there's a lot of the zero lot line stuff. So you have a lot of stuff that is 3 feet or less in situations like that. So I just wanted to point that out from a fire. I know that's not the fire department specific question, but I think just from a building code perspective, there is nothing different that's required when you have more than 6 feet between homes.
Doesn't the fire department have some regulations, though, on how close the buildings are?
Not to my knowledge, anything under 6 feet. My understanding is, and I serve on actually a committee at the Department of Housing, I don't think you get into anything special, and I don't think the fire department can get engaged. And maybe Amy could speak.
They have some regulations on the flow of water.
Well,
correct?
yeah, I'm just pointing out just from a structure standpoint.
All right, any additional questions? Oh,
Can I
I'm
go
sorry.
back to
Sure.
something that Mr. McWilliams was asking about, the 4 additional lots, if you look at the, what's up on the screen, the previous under the
Yeah, that
R2,
was one.
there's no open space in that particular development plan. So all of the lots are actually taken up, or all the land is taken up, with the exception of the detention basin in people's yards. So the proposals are different. There's 4 additional lots, but they're significantly different.
Different acreage as well.
Well, Mr. Flagger, we'll need to hold up on that. Go ahead. Well, yeah. Mr.
He said different acreage, but his calculation was based on the number of acres at 3.6 units per acre. That's what Mr. Delker responded to you. It would be 98.
So what I'm hearing is, by going to R2A, it enables them to create 6+ acres of open space
And 4 additional lots.
and 4 additional lots. Thank you.
Flagger, you will have an opportunity here in just a minute to respond. Anything else, any additional questions? Mr.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Urban just made I think we just confused ourselves a little more.
Well, he was
I mean,
asking-
R2A, unless I'm incorrect, is 5.81 DU per acre, not 3.6 whatever he's proposing. So
That's what you can get the yield, but that's not what his yield is.
I know, but in one of our requirements though is the maximum density is 5.81. Do we have a minimum?
No,
So it's determined by us, correct?
it's determined by the development plan that's in front of you,
Okay.
which is not 5.8, it's 3.
He's under the
Go under, right.
5.81.
It's kind of like the speed limit on I-71
Right.
is 70, you don't have to go
Right.
70.
Well,
You
that's what I
can't
was
go-
just trying to clarify, because it almost made it sound like he's squeezing in 4 more lots in 98, but he's trying to stay at where he was at in the R2, but he wants to zone it R2A. Now, if we make a recommendation for an R2A, and he's proposed this developmental plan, it goes to physical court for approval.
Correct.
So, one way or the other, if he develops whatever it's on this developmental plan, does he come back to us if he's going to revise the developmental plan?
Well, when we
build
get there,
something different?
I think we'll discuss that once we close public comment, we're getting to our decisions.
Okay.
If you want, yeah.
All right, to Mr. Horton.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, on your proposed detention basin, number 2, the large one, what would be the depth of that from a foot standpoint or something? And is that, the lines that are there, is that indicating a fence or what? I couldn't find the legend as to.
Let me get you, also name and address if you would, please.
Erickson, Lanes End Development, 503 Washburn Avenue, 40222.
Thank you, sir.
Right now, looks like we're proposing that basin to be approximately 5 feet deep.
About what, 5 feet deep?
5 feet deep.
Okay, and the lines around it, is that a fence or what do they indicate? I couldn't, on the legend, determine what that was.
That just kind of shows the perimeter of the basin.
Okay, the perimeter of the basin itself.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Ms. Bonet.
I'm just curious why the decision was made to pursue a change in zoning rather than asking for additional waivers that might be necessary for minimum lot size, square footage, or minimum width of lot. I mean, could you not, since you're so close to the density of an R2, why not just ask for variances for those items and leave it at R2? Can they not do that?
I'll let them,
Go ahead, Mr. Young.
let them answer. Okay, I'm sorry. You cannot ask for a waiver or variance of the minimum lot area.
Okay.
That's non-waivable. So you can ask for side yards, front yards, those type of things, but the lot width of 12,000 square foot is not waivable for variance.
And so then, since you're so close to the density, why can't you make it work as a R2 instead of?
Well, R2 has, each lot in an R2 has to be 80 foot wide.
Right.
And 12,000 square feet.
Right.
If we were to design this subdivision at 80 foot wide, and we're doing an empty nester home product, I mean, you would have a totally different layout. You'd be back to that original plan.
Right.
You cannot, I cannot come to this board and ask you all to waive the 12,000 square foot. Our lot minimums on this are about 8,000 square foot in the 50 foot wide. So those are set parameters that your development code says are non-waivable. So that is the reason for the request.
I'm just trying to get this explanation because I think a lot of people fear the R2A when they think that possibly if this wasn't completed and then the zoning has been changed and then another plan comes up that meets the criteria for an R2A, that would have a higher density. That's why I'm thinking if there was any way you could make it work at the R2, I was trying to see why you made that decision.
I will
Go
answer that
ahead.
one. We always put in a binding element on the development plan, and if there are any changes, they have to come back. So nobody could
Right.
just automatically do it.
Right, but if they
without-
come back and it meets all of the requirements based on that zoning, and some of us are not here that are here now, it's a
Well, we
concern.
always go through a case history, and we've actually denied, in 2011, I remember we had a development come in after the recession was kind of over and asked to split up some lots, and we denied it based on that binding element saying no further division of lots.
Right.
So you do have a lot of discretionary ability at that point by putting that binding element in there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Klingenfuse, did I see your hand?
I'm not sure I understood that, because if you've rezoned it to R2A and it comes back before us again, you're saying,
We can always deny it if we don't like what the new development plan is. Because we're basing the decision, if we're recommending approval on the plan that's presented today.
But are we allowed to, we're not allowed to deny something just because we don't like it. There has to be.
Ms. Bonet, let me let Bob.
I'll yield to her.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
I don't think we're allowed to reject something just because we don't like it. We
Well,
have to have a valid
I said we
reason.
don't like it. It's based on technical reasons. You could require a new traffic study, you could require, a look at stormwater management, you could look at all the other binding elements. And you can always find there's a lot of discretionary ability when you're coming back after having reviewed a plan as part of a zoning map amendment.
Okay.
Mr. Klingenfuse, anything else that you had, sir? No? Okay. Any additional questions? Any additional questions? I'm sorry?
Just get the one thing with.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Irvin.
Well,
Yes.
I'd like to, Paula Wall has pulled up the standards for roadways, just to try to go back to that subject matter for a moment and clarify.
Yes, I found some guidance in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is the federal and state laws for striping and signage for conformity throughout the United States. The guidance, there is guidance, there's not a should, it's not a shall, but it's a should. The guidance is that a center line stripe should be installed on roads that are 18 feet and within that average daily traffic. It's not required, but it's a should. And then basically it says any roads that are less than that, there should be further study and evaluation. So 18 feet appears to be kind of the minimum standards for allowing or adequate provision for having a center line stripe, which is, I think, what you were trying to get at in your question.
Okay. Any additional questions with that information from the commissioners? Okay. Seeing none, we'll now move into the rebuttal evidence and cross-examination by the applicant. Mr. Nichols, you have 10 minutes if you have any rebuttal evidence.
Thank you all for the questions, and hopefully we've addressed at least some of your concerns. I want to talk about, we mentioned the market, right? These housing meeting a certain market. I want to bring up to the point that we've had a couple of people that live in the surrounding neighborhoods that are also excited about this because they're looking to downsize. They're empty nesters, and as I mentioned earlier, that there are certainly people in this community that want to stay, and they want additional housing options, and they want to stay in this vicinity of Oldham County. So to say that all of the residents will be new residents coming in was probably a misstatement on my part. So we do envision some people in the surrounding areas downsizing to this. In addition, I want to reiterate that we clearly think this falls within, meets the standards of the comprehensive plan. I don't want to go through the justification statement and read all that we have, all the standards in the justification statement, but I will hit a few of them for you for the record.
Mr. Nichols, that might be more appropriate at closing, for your closing statement. You'll have an opportunity here in just a few minutes to do that if you.
Okay.
This is kind of rebuttal and answering questions.
Talk to him about that.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
All right, so that's fine. Some of the questions, and I've tried to elaborate as I've had the questions from the commission that probably discussed a lot about the rebuttal. Going back to the neighborhood meeting, we have two neighbors here tonight, and like I said, our first neighborhood meeting, we had 17 residents show up. A Stonefield Trace was represented, Heather Green was represented, and our neighbors across Cedar Point Road were there also. I think everybody was interested in what we're proposing. Billy has a long reputation of building in this community. He actually can point to projects that are in this area right down the street to give some level of comfort. And I hope the fact that we do only have two neighbors here shows that we tried to listen. We did go back and address their concerns and come up with what we keep going back to we think is a good plan. It is a zoning change request, but it's a zoning change request that provides flexibility. These are still single-family lots, single-family homes on single-family lots. Your backyard now, instead of being your grass, is going to be a community lawn that will be maintained. Honestly, the entire development will be maintained by one lawn care company. So there's a lot of, it's different, but it is very much similar, and it's become a product that the R2A enables us to come up with this type of plan that I think meets what we were hearing, or what Billy's been hearing from the market, and what we've been, just the experience of how many homes are in Oldham County, and hearing what the folks at our Stonefield Trace neighbors and hearing at our neighborhood meeting kind of came and talked to us about. I try not to make that a closing statement, but just I think we had the opportunity to answer any questions. And also one of the things that the zoning change request and the side yard variance request allows us to protect that environmentally sensitive area that we have on this site. I think it is, otherwise you saw the original plan, we had a road running right through here, but now we're able to actually keep the tree mass in that area and keep that as designated open space to be protected by the homeowners association. It becomes the entirety of this development's property. So I don't know, I hope I answered every question that was asked, and maybe Donnie can answer.
Zimmerman?
I was able to pull up the Dogwood Estates traffic impact study, and Zale Smith Road is listed in that study as 18 feet wide. So previous example of how we've handled this.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Mr. Nichols, on your rebuttal? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Delker?
Back to Ms. Monet's question, I think, going back to what's the core of the reason we're asking for the zoning change, and I think as someone else already pointed out, I live in Stonefield Trace. I've built probably 40 of the homes in there. We finished out Cedar Point Village. I've built many of the homes in Heather Green. So it's an area of, that I live in personally. Obviously, this is a business opportunity for me, but beyond that, we want to do something that we can be proud of as a company, and that I can know that we're meeting what the needs of both the existing residents of Oldham County have come into my office every week and tell us what they're looking for. And so, quite frankly, we're trying to differentiate between Heather Green and Heather Ridge, or Stonefield Trace or Granville. We're trying to offer a different type of a product that we know folks who currently and want to live in Oldham County desire. And so, whether that means anything or not, the fact that I'm going to eat in the restaurants and go to the bank and the coffee shops and all that kind of stuff in the area that I'm proposing the development in, I feel very confident that we're doing something or proposing something that would be a welcome addition, I think, to Oldham County. And, while I understand, I've got the 3/4 acre lot in Stonefield Trace myself. And while I understand that that's what some people want, I do believe there is a huge market shift going on, not just in Oldham County, but across the country for this type of housing. So I just wanted to, I don't know if that adds any more clarification as to why we're, wanting that. But we want to be different and meet the needs of what we feel like the consumer in the market is desiring. So thank you.
Thank you. Again, Mr. Nichols, anything else that y'all need to add? Okay. All right, with that, Mr. Feigert or Mr. Garden, do you all have anything on rebuttal that you would like to add? Okay. What about the final statement? Would either one of you on the opposition like to have a final statement? Mr. Feigert? Okay. All right, Mr. Nichols, we're down to final statement of the applicant.
This is the time now.
This is the time, yes, sir.
Okay. So instead of going through the entire justification, I'll just hit some of the highlights. Obviously, we think this is a good plan, and we think it meets the needs and it meets the market demand, as Billy just said. And I like the fact that he brought up that it is unique, right? It's not going to be the same as all those other neighborhoods, but that allows for some for new housing options for existing residents. One of the part of the comprehensive plan talks about land use, and it says that as part of your development, you want to be able to utilize the development review process. Well, we clearly think we're doing that. We did that with the neighborhood meetings, the technical review committee, and we're doing that here today. It talks about management of development areas that have maybe some environmental concerns or limited development potential. Well, you see what we've done with the open space there and how we've developed this plan to allow 6.1 acres of open space. And so the contours of the land that we've left as open space meets that objective of the land use. We're trying to preserve some of this land here, again, with open space, which is part of the comprehensive plan. We're talking about connecting to the neighborhood north of us. We're talking about being able to put it in a place that has the capacity to take on the water, the sewer, and the utilities. We're putting that into place. We're putting it in an area that we talked about, the corridor in Buckner, that has some job opportunities for people and is close to I-71. And I think and while we're doing this, we are preserving some of the character that makes Oldham County great. So it's for these reasons, and the reasons specifically in the justification statements, that we ask that you approve this plan, this zoning map amendment, and this variance. Thank you.
All righty, Mr. Nichols, thank you. And with that, the two dockets, PC 17032 and PC 17033, are closed. And we will, Commissioners, consider the zoning change request first.
Let me go through all of
Yeah.
what their whole
Okay.
decision is.
Go ahead.
Okay, just to be clear, because I know there were questions about the decision-making process you're going to go through. There are three decisions today, and the first one is a zoning map amendment, and that's from R2 to R2A, and determining whether or not that meets the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. The second item will be the variances, because you can't approve a development plan if you haven't approved the variances, because the houses probably wouldn't fit. And then the third decision is a preliminary subdivision plan. And so the first item for you to consider is a zoning map amendment to make a motion to fiscal court, because this is a zoning map and they have jurisdiction over the final say-so, on either a motion to recommend approval or denial. And in doing that, you can rely on your own knowledge of the comprehensive plan or the justification statement submitted by the applicant, any parts of it that you care to.
Okay. Mr. Carter, is there anything that you need to add at this point? Okay, Commissioners, we will consider first the recommendation to fiscal court on the request for a zoning change from R2 residential district to R2A. So the chair would now entertain a motion on the proposed zoning change, a request for a zoning change. Any motions? Mr. McWilliams?
Where's Greg King when I need him? I'll give this a shot, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to move that we approve a recommendation to fiscal court for the zoning map amendment from R2 to R2A because it complies with the objectives of the comprehensive plan. We were given several pages of those objectives in our staff report, which is also reviewed by staff, and they are in our reports. The R2A allows for creation of a different residential complexion in that particular area, but one I don't think detracts from what is already there. It's good to have residential choices for people. It's good to have things for folks that are starting out and folks like me close to the end of the line. It's near Buckner. Buckner has had a huge amount of industrial development that has taken place in the last years, and people that are going to be working there need places to live. It has excellent access to Interstate 71. I think they have demonstrated an effort to increase the amount of open space in the development, which I believe is a good thing. It also is consistent with the future land use map of Oldham County, designating that area as a residential area. There have been a lot of physical and economic changes within that area, and I'm not going to go through them all again, but if you'll have been around a while, and I can remember when all that was farmland, and nobody thought about developments, and nobody thought about the industry. So there have been a huge number of changes, which I think also supports this application of a change in zoning from R2 to R2A. And that's about all I can do, Mr. Chairman.
Carter, is that adequate?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor to recommend to fiscal court the zoning change request from R2 residential district to R2A. Do we have a second? Mr. Falvey seconds, multiple seconds. Okay. Now, any discussion on the motion of recommendation to fiscal court for the zoning change? Is there any discussion? Mr. Finney?
I guess this is a question for Mr. Urban. Does this in any way possibly set a precedent for adjoining property that's not developed to go R2A? You know, we often hear that, well, this property here is this, and this property here is that, so why can't this property be R2A? And we already know we have traffic problems. We already, and we already know that we have roads that are not going to be addressed for those traffic problems for who knows when down the road, so to speak. And we've got overcrowding in our schools. What kind of precedent does changing this to R2A set for the future? And for one, not only this development coming back for a change to be possibly more concentrated, or for neighboring property not yet developed to come in as R2A and be a very highly, concentrated development.
So your real question is, with all that comment, is this set a precedent? And, it's interesting because we talk about this in the planning world all the time about precedent and whether or not you rely on a previous decision to make a current decision. And I always say that each applicant stands on its own. Each application has to meet our standards. Each application has to go through the review process, technical review, meet the standards, and especially in terms of our capacity. So anybody in the future can try to rezone a piece of property and think that they could point at this decision today and say, well, you did it once, you do it again. We use the example of Zale Smith Road and striping. That was kind of precedent setting, but yet it was an example of how we handled adequacy of roads. So I think that if another property in the general region came in and tried to do the same thing, we really don't necessarily say, well, we did it over there, so we're going to do it here. It has to meet all the capacity standards and go through review. And these are discretionary decisions in a zoning map amendment. Discretionary means just because it meets the regulations, we don't have to approve it. If you're changing or recommending changing the zoning, it's always based on the conditions of that application. So can it be used as an example? Yes. Is it a precedent? I kind of draw the line that it's not necessarily.
So the decision for a zoning map change is not, we're not bound by the comprehensive plan, so to speak.
Well, the comprehensive plan, sure. That's our tenant, if you will. That's what we rely
right.
on. And the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. So, no, we really do rely heavily on the comprehensive plan. The motion has to say how it complies with the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. That's the first test of a zoning map amendment.
And I think Mr. McWilliams outlined, how it complied, and I think Mr. Carter agreed with that, with his statements or with his, how you put that together.
I understand, and those things can be worded to apply almost in any situation. And so, because we are seeing, in the county, we are seeing more and more of this type of thing happening. Zale Smith Road is a very good example, brought up when that came before the commission. We are creating a shotgun effect, a full choke shotgun. We're changing, we're going to put 4 lanes in front of the subdivision. What good does that do when you go less than a quarter mile and it's down from a 4-lane road to an 18-foot road? That for traffic, that doesn't do anything but create problems. The same type of thing happened in the area over on Norton Commons. We are creating a monster here that somewhere has to have a stopping point. And we don't seem to have the ability with the rules given to us to stop the problem.
Well, you absolutely do. You're in the driver's seat in this decision. You can agree with the justification or not. You can agree with the motion that was made or not. You can say that the goals and objectives that the applicant has presented to us are worthless. You do not have to agree with anything. You're in absolute position. As staff, what we try to do is say, okay, if there's this condition, we present items on how you all have the great decision-making authority, not us, how to handle these situations, whether it's school capacity, roads, water. And, one way to I guess, move towards denial is to strictly adhere to, well, the road's not 22 feet wide, so we deny everything. That's a possibility. That's what you have to decide today. That's what your choices are today. Is this zoning map amendment based on the motion? Do you agree with it or not? And you speak your mind.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion for a request to go to fiscal court for their consideration from R2 to R2A? Mr. Horton. And then
Thank you,
Ms.
Mr.
Benoit.
Chairman. This might be for our counsel here and regarding the motion. Some time ago, I was approached by one of the magistrates questioning that did you not have to state the reason that the current zoning is inappropriate to be able to change a zoning? Okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's when, in your staff report, we always put proposed motions, and you can pick one or all, any or all of the following. And the second one is the existing zoning classification, given the property is inappropriate and proposed is appropriate.
Right.
You don't have to. You can pick any one of the 3.
Okay, well, I was told, what my point was is that to make sure that the motion did what Mr. McWilliams apparently wants it to do, is to state why the current zoning is inappropriate. And the magistrate came back and said he had checked this out, and then this reason a counsel. Is there something that you might want to put in your motion? The current thing is inappropriate because, or does that need to be in there at all?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
The courts consider the comprehensive plan as a guideline. And as long as the decision you make is not arbitrary, and is based on facts that are in the record, including testimony from citizens, you can rely on the testimony of people that live in the community about the traffic flow. Then it will most likely be approved by a court if it's taken to.
Okay, thank you.
It's contested.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Bonet.
This should be quick. Because I'm struggling a little bit, in that I really like the development. I'm struggling with the zoning portion. In the past, I'll look at cases like this and I try to look at the zoning and ignore the actual development plan and look at it, just pretend that development plan doesn't exist. Look at if the zoning is appropriate the way it is or inappropriate and make a decision, then look at the development plan. Is that the way I'm supposed to do it? Or should I look at the zoning with the thought of the development plan that I know I'm going to look at next?
Well, you are in fact suggesting rezoning based on what you've seen in testimony regarding the development plan itself. And they can't do the proposed development plan if the zoning map isn't changed, so they're intertwined. I think it's difficult, and it's a good question, to say, all right, how do I really think about this new zoning classification? And the question of, can somebody else come in and do something different? And we've kind of answered that. They'd have to come back in front of the Planning Commission, is always a good one. Are they reaching? I think one of the tests is, are they reaching too far? And I'll make a gross example. If they were going to industrial zoning, we'd have a hard time thinking about, I don't care how desirable the jobs might be in this industry, it's not the right location. Is the zoning map, requested zoning map amendment appropriate for the area? Is it really totally out of character? You've heard some testimony from neighbors saying, well, there were bigger lots and then smaller lots and now even smaller lots. So you kind of weigh it based on not the particulars of that development plan that's proposed at this point, but obviously there has been a proposed development plan, and will it really dramatically change the character of the area? That's probably the best guidance I can give you. You really can't eliminate what you've heard.
Right, okay.
Okay. Any additional discussion? Yes, sir, Mr. McWilliams.
Chairman, I guess I ought to, since that's my motion, I may try to, defend is not the right word, explain maybe is a better word. But for me, I think 4 more houses versus what they could get in R2, plus a significant amount in excess of what's required, open space, is worth it. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I had a lot of open space, and probably a really good thing that I had a lot. Now, Miss Crosby. But anyway, I just think that's important, and particularly for kids that are, and or adults that are in really high density types of situations. They need places where they can go. So I'm hanging my hat on that. And as far as the roads and things are concerned, you know, I have those same concerns, Sam, that you do. Unfortunately, infrastructure never comes before development. Infrastructure is reactive. It always is. And well, maybe not always, but most of the time it is. And that's just the way that things go. So, you know, if we looked at things and say, well, the roads, I think it could really hamper development that we want, because eventually the infrastructure is going to, or the development is going to require the infrastructure to respond to the development. Fox Run Road, traffic light. You can't have one there. And these are the reasons you can't have one. Well, guess what's there? Because the development made the state, enough pressure was applied to put one there. And it needed to be there. But it was technically in violation of their little rules and regulations. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And I'll be quiet now, maybe.
All right. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Douglas?
You know, at first I was apprehensive mainly because we were going from R2 to R2A. Mainly because I was looking at, you know, although there was more homes in R2 that was originally proposed, the lots were larger. There was going to be a little more space between, just besides 10 feet between Stonefield Trace. But to be honest, I haven't heard anybody except for maybe one person talk about Stonefield Trace, and I believe the builder lives there. He's going to be facing most of his neighbors if there's complaints about the houses being so close, besides having that long 3/4 acre lot that would have been proposed in the original development. So, you know, I wish there was more space in between the two subdivisions, but, you know, it is I haven't heard a lot of objections to that, so, you know, that's the difference between an R2 and R2A, I guess.
All right, folks, we ready to vote? Didn't see any more hands going up here, so this is a motion of recommendation to fiscal court to change the zoning on docket PZ 17032 from R2 to R2A. And I'll call on Ms. Fox to do the vote, and this is a motion to approve the zoning change.
Recommend approval.
Recommend approval. I said that. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Neal?
Yes.
Mr. McWilliams?
Yes.
Mr. Klingenfuss?
Yes.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Hampton?
Yes.
Mr. Halflin?
Yes.
Mr. Finney?
I like the subdivision plan, I just don't like the infrastructure. No.
Mr. Falvey?
Yes.
Mr. Douglas?
Yes.
Ms. Crosby?
Yes.
Ms. Bonet?
Yes.
All right, the motion for the zoning change recommendation to fiscal court on docket PZ 17032 has been approved on a vote of 11 to 1. All right, with that, now we will consider the variance request on docket PZ 17033. And Mr. Urban, would you outline that, please?
So now you are going to rely on what you know about the proposed development plan and consider a variance request from 7.5 feet minimum side yard setback to 5 feet. 7 feet to 5 feet. And as always in your staff report, there's a sample motion to either approve or deny. In deciding on a variance, you may consider whether the requested variance arises from special circumstances which do not generally apply to land in the general vicinity or same zone. The strict application of the provisions of the regulations would deprive the applicant of the reasonable use of land or would create an unnecessary hardship on the applicant, or the circumstances are the result of actions of the applicant taken subsequent to the adoption of the zoning regulation for which relief is sought. So again, your first decision here, or it's actually your second one, is whether or not you believe that the variance request is appropriate.
All right, you've heard Mr. Urban outline what's requested here. What is the pleasure of the commission? Chair would now entertain a motion on the variance request. Mr. Falvey?
Yes, I'd like to move to approve the variance because it will not adversely affect the public health, safety, or welfare and will not alter the essential character of the general vicinity, will not cause a hazard or nuisance to the public, and will not allow an unreasonable circumvention of the requirements of the zoning regulations.
Okay, Mr. Carter, is that adequate? Yes. Okay, have an adequate motion according to Mr. Carter, and do we have a second? Ms. Smith seconds. Okay, now any discussion on the request for variance on the 070040 residential district property development regulations? Is there any discussion? Mr. Douglas?
Question for Mr. Urban. Wasn't R2A recently modified?
It wasn't. When we went through, through the study review committee and the planning commission, we recommended that there be a opportunity for 5-foot side yard setbacks. When it got to fiscal court, the discussion that they had was there's a variance process. And so rather than allowing it by right, they said, well, if somebody wants 5-foot setbacks, they'll have to go through a variance. So now there's a discretionary ability to either approve or deny.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Question.
Question been called. And this is a motion on docket PZ 17033 to approve the variance, side yard variance. So, Ms. Fox, if you would, do the vote, please.
Mr. Horton?
Yes.
Mr. Halfling,
No.
Oh, wait a minute.
Who was,
Who was that? I'm sorry.
Mr. Halfling,
Yes.
Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Ms. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Neal,
Yes.
Mr. Hampton,
No.
Mr. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
Yes.
Ms. Bonet,
Yes.
Mr. McWilliams,
Yes.
Mr. Klingenfuss.
Yes.
All right, the motion on docket PZ 17033 on the variance request has been approved on a vote of 11 to 1. And with that, now the chair would entertain a motion on the preliminary plan request on docket PZ 17033.
well, hang on, let me go through binding
Oh, I'm
elements.
sorry.
This is
I'm
where,
sorry.
now you've, see, you always get ahead.
I do get ahead of you.
You want me to say something, then you.
Sorry. That's right.
Oh, it's almost 12.
Almost lunchtime. Sorry.
Well, okay, so now that you've recommended to fiscal court that they consider changing the zoning and you've adopted and approved variances for the side yard setback, you're looking at the entire preliminary subdivision plan or development plan, and there are several binding elements that I've heard. There were a couple in your staff report. The first one is that the approval applies only to the plan presented at the November 28, 2017 Oldham County Planning Commission public hearing. The second, there shall be no subdivision of any lot into greater number of lots without review by the Oldham County Planning Commission. In the staff report, I'm going to scratch out number 3 and add in that number 3 is now, the developer shall stripe the center line of Cedar Point Road to KYTC standards from New Cut Road to Heather Green, which is 2 subdivisions to the north. Another binding element, as the homeowners association will be responsible for stormwater facilities maintenance, specifically side and rear yards, including drainage and erosion issues. And then the fifth binding element is that the project is to be phased at 40 building permits per year, beginning with the record plat. So we didn't ask the applicant whether they agree to these. I don't think that there are any surprises, really.
Mr. Nichols, are you all okay with that? Or Mr. Earl?
Yes.
Okay, so those were the binding elements that I heard during discussion today that you would consider.
All right, you've heard the details outlined by Mr. Urban on the binding elements. Now the chair would entertain a motion on the preliminary subdivision plan on docket PZ 17033. Ms. Bonet?
I move that we approve the development plan. It does comply with multiple objectives of the comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations as based on testimony that we heard today and on the document provided to us by the applicant and included in our staff report. This particular development plan addresses market demand. It does have a lower density than is allowed in the current zoning. It has additional open space above and beyond what is required in the existing zoning. And it's like a unicorn. It's something different, it's something attractive, and I think it would benefit the surrounding area. The approval is contingent upon strict adherence to the 5 binding elements as stated by Jim Urban. I think that's it.
Mr. Carter, is that adequate?
Yes.
Okay, have an adequate motion on the floor. Do we have a second? Okay, Mr. Halfling, I saw his hand up first, so we'll put him down for the second. Now, is there any discussion on the approval of the preliminary plan on docket PZ 17033? Any discussion?
Question?
Okay, don't see any hands. Oh, Mr. Douglas, sorry.
I know there was discussion, but I guess we're just striking out the collector road, widening of where it was recommended, that the
I
road
think
improvement.
we substituted, there was binding element number 3 in the staff report, which talked about that. And I think during discussion, we substituted instead of widening, because we'd have only a small segment of roadway widened to 22 feet, that instead we have a safety improvement of striping the road.
Was that also recommended by the state?
The state did not require any improvements.
They didn't?
And this is on the county's portion of Cedar Point Road,
Right.
not the state's.
Right.
The state's is already striped from 146 all the way to New Cut. So we're picking up where the striping ends and going through past this development to the other two subdivisions, so that that's where all the traffic is.
Okay.
But that's again, just a recommended binding element. You're welcome to revise it.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Okay. We'll proceed to vote on the preliminary plan, subdivision plan for docket PZ 17033 with the attached binding elements. Ms. Fox, this is a motion to approve.
Ms. Bonet,
Yes.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Douglas,
No.
Mr. Falvey,
Yes.
Mr. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. Halfling,
Yes.
Mr. Hampton,
No?
Mr. Horton, Mr. Klingenfuss,
Yes.
Mr. McWilliams,
Yes.
Mr. Neal,
Yes.
Ms. Smith.
Yes.
All right, the motion on the preliminary subdivision plan on docket PZ 17033 has been approved on a vote of 10-2. And with that, Commissioners, we've got several things under other business that we need to attend to. I think what we'll do is go ahead and take a break for lunch. We're going to have a short presentation for Dr. Robert Arvin and Joyce Albertson that have retired from the commission next door here. And then after that, we'll probably go to lunch and then come back and take up the other business that we have this afternoon on the zoning ordinance updates. So we'll try to, about an hour, something like that, we'll try to be back in session. So we stand adjourned.
Billy, I lived in a development like that in Chicago 30 years ago. And I looked at that and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe that. So it's, I